want to go through these one by one, or what do you have in mind?
I mean, do we need to go through them one by one, considering they're just floating? I mean,
well, personally, the only one that I think we need to discuss right now is the one that is causing controversy.
Okay. The collaboration one.
Yeah. Right. So,
I'll speak to that.
Yeah, there are two on there referring to liberation.
you probably read the one in question. I don't know.
Do you think it'd be possible if people see one in there they want to discuss, to mention it, and that's
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I don't know.
I think one by one isn't necessarily
Useful.
because basically these minutes from the executive, I believe, deliberation voting. There you go. Okay. Deliberation voting was the only one that was overturned. If you want to say, I used the term contested. I used the term contested or overturned because
left open, I think.
nothing has. It has not been actioned. Okay. So we can have a discussion about this. Be aware Rachel's not here. Okay. So I was at that meeting. I will tell you what my stance at that meeting was. And that's the best I can offer. I'm not going to speak for Rachel. John is also willing to speak to this, but be aware that there are no actions that have come out of any of this. Okay?
Quickly reiterate the situation again. Everything at the council was not for the executive by letter of the constitution could overturn or open up debate and carry this forward as far as we were all aware.
It wouldn't be so much overturning as changing.
It's not overturning. I think that's the term that we shouldn't be using here because it's not already in place. But also, this is a draft document, so the format's quite vague. I'll apologise for that. And they are technically approved, I think, but we're still going to have to rubber stamp that. They are technically for public consumption, but please, if you're going to take this away and be showing anybody else, do make that aware that some of this is still up for debate. Right. I'm not saying it will change this format. I think we're pretty much there. But there may be a point there.
Can I just clarify something?
Yeah.
Because this is one this was stuff from the April Student Council that then went to the exec. How many were present at the April Student Council?
It was under.
I know it wasn't quoted, but how many were there? Okay, so
I am aware there was more. Yes.
And as with November, there was people coming in.
yeah, but you're talking ballpark 20. Yeah. How many were at the executive meeting? This executive meeting?
7, 8.
A smaller number.
A smaller number, of course.
Yeah.
But
Executive
you
is
said
small.
the executive meeting was for it.
The executive meeting was for it because it's
25.
Half plus
Sorry,
one.
it was 25.
not the executive meeting.
No, at the
Council.
council.
Okay. Yes.
So what's quoted for the executive?
Half plus one.
Half plus 1.
Which is, what's the number?
4. 5.
Yeah,
It was-
we had
it
8
was-
at the time.
Yeah.
Yeah, it
and
was half, so
You
5.
that
have
was
a
five.
small executive.
5.
That is not a good number, and that's
It's not a good
why
number,
we
we
need
know.
more to get one.
You know.
Okay, I see a question.
My ignorance again, I just want this clarified a bit, sorry. So, this has not been actioned because of Quarit,
No.
No.
because
Shall I?
of
Yeah.
controversy?
No.
No.
Here's the sort of chain of events. Student council, where these were originally presented, was not quorum. When it's not quorum, as stated in our constitution, all motions that we discussed them, we debated them, and there was a vote, but because it wasn't quorum, it's not binding. When it's not binding, it then goes to the executive committee for a final discussion and things
Who
like that.
is the executive committee?
Well, I'll explain that in a second. We'll go through the timeline first, and we'll get to the executive committee. Where was I? Yeah, so it goes to the mythical executive committee.
It's not mythical. It
Yeah,
exists.
kind of here, but
Wait, yeah.
And what happened was, it was supposed to be discussed in an executive meeting, not the executive committee. However, because there was so much of it, and there was other business that needed done, it was done as a special residential summer, this meeting. So, the executive committee is the formal structure that you guys has. It is composed of the sabbatical officers, the president, the deputy president, vice president. It also has a place on it for a college representative from every college. It also has several specialist positions such as LGBT officer, women's officer, disabilities officer, international students officer. There's more. I won't list them all.
So the executive office is basically what I know as ISA.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Right. Okay.
They are the officers elected.
Officers elected.
The problem is that there aren't very many of them elected, and as you saw in the latest by-election, there was a lot of positions open. There's only one person who has thrown his hat into the ring. That makes it more difficult because when there are people who are within the executive, say there's an idea to run a campaign about promoting elections, which is one of the items that didn't happen. You say, right, well, how do we do that across such a large partnership? Well, there's John, he's in West Highland. Maybe he could do a little bit in West Highland. And we've got Ashling is in Perth, maybe she could do a little bit in Perth. But when you only have 5 people, your ability to do that is considerably limited. So at the moment, the big issue is that there's really not very...
Just one? Is there just one big...
This one of the issues here, in terms of ongoing sort of getting this stuff taken care of, is there's not a lot of people. We're relying on Heidi, John, and a couple other executive members. Michael is an executive member, a chair students officer.
Neil as well, but not
Oh, well.
Neil's an SMS.
SNS.
Neil's an SMS,
But not
so slightly different thing.
rights. It's not
But they are also, actually,
Is
Bernadette McLaren from Bruce Castle College still?
She was a co-opted member, as was George. There were several co-opted members. Co-opted members do not have voting rights. They are on the exec. Unfortunately, because our co-opted members did not come forward by election, except Karen, sorry, then they no longer will be on the exec. Is that correct, Melissa, in saying that?
I'm sorry?
Is that correct in saying that?
I'm sorry, you just cut me out not listening there. Co-opted members are allowed to sit and partake in discussions, but when it comes to an actual vote, they're not allowed to vote. They can partake in discussions, and I think what you just said was they did not stand in the by-election, which was correct. So they may continue to sit on the House Executive, however, they will not be voting on this.
I think it's up for debate whether they should continue, because there was an opportunity for them to serve in that capacity, and they chose not to, which is the idea of co-opting people is often used to bridge gaps where there's not someone who came forward in the main election. And if someone has expressed interest afterwards, oh, geez, I wish I was around and, had run in the election, they go, oh, well, we can co-opt you until the by-election, and then you run it, and then you carry on as so.
That was the hope.
That's kind of the idea. Yes.
Before we get into this motion, can I just ask, is there a reason why you wasn't present at this meeting?
He resigned at that
He had
point.
resigned at that point.
You'd already resigned.
Yes. He resigned before that
Right.
meeting.
I just point out the officers that we've got there, we haven't put the roles beside them. That's quite important in this case. Ashling Curie is the first college rep as discussed. She had voting rights. Holly Scrimger is the SNSO for creative
Cultural studies.
cultural studies, is it right? Okay. So she doesn't have voting rights in this. Heidi, as you know, is vice president. Rachel is the president, is still the president. Michael is a mature officer. He's got voting rights. Ilsa Fife was the disabilities officer. Unfortunately, she has left to resign. But she was president of the day and had voting rights, and myself. So we had, I think that's...
He's West Highland College rep, by the way.
West Highland College rep, yeah, just in case you don't know. Looks at it. So that's 6 people there with voting rights. So over the 2 days. Michael was president on day 1. Ilsa was president on day 2.
Were these discussed over both days? Sorry, I wasn't here either.
Yes.
Right.
There was a 2-day session.
Kevin, yes.
I was just looking at the Constitution with regard to cooperative members, and I think the way we're using cooperative members is not quite what the Constitution had in mind for the we don't have anyone who knows about IT, so we'll co-opt Simon for 2 years. So he wouldn't really be, it's not an elected position, but we're co-opting to fill gaps.
Yeah.
And I think the spirit of it would be if there is a chance to be elected and we haven't to,
Yeah.
you know.
Do we have any other quick questions before we actually get on to discussing the motion? Oh, it's great that this is going to be, because there will be some talk about it, I think. And we do want to have lunch, and lunch is extremely important. It's extremely important to me. You're cranky on that, don't you? You don't want a cranky chair. So, any more than that. Any other quick questions before we actually get into the motion? No. Good. Do you want to summarize
Yes.
or just take questions?
I can summarize within reason, okay? Obviously, this was a motion presented by Rachel Parker. Okay, she's not here, as we know. So she would be able to explain this much better than I can. This came up at Student Council in April. It was probably the most discussed motion that was there. I don't want to be okay. It was the most discussed motion that was there. I don't, to be honest, remember who presented the motion. Maybe someone was at Student Council. I'm afraid I was at Student Council. I was a VP elect, but everything was new to me, so I really, unfortunately, do not remember who presented the motion.
It's not info.
I honestly don't.
I think no.
I don't know how relevant that is, but we don't want to spend too much time on it. Someone else presented the motion. Lots of discussion about it, and it was voted no with, I believe, 17 votes against, 4 and a couple of abstaining. I remember that Student Council. I want to explain what my position is here as well. Okay, not throwing anyone under the bus, but I need to explain my position with this as well. I remember my reasons. I actually voted no at that Student Council because my reasons were more based on the ally argument that I don't declare myself disabled, or define myself as disabled, but that doesn't mean I don't feel I could vote for Ailsa Fife, who was running as our disabilities officer, as the best representative for disabled students. So that was more my argument, much more than the holding on to store data. That seemed to be the hot button issue. So when we brought it to exec, so it was voted in principle down. I tried to say practice. I mean principle. It was voted in principle down at Student Council. Brought it to residential, where Rachel was then able to explain the voting more, be a bit clearer, perhaps, how it would be done, and explain it. At that time, because she was able to explain it, a lot of discussion took place. It's not necessarily reflected on in these minutes how much discussion was taking place. A lot of discussion was taking place. And executive, I did abstain from that vote because I was not comfortable. But executive did pass it, so with the majority of votes, it did get passed. Okay, because Rachel did feel. Now, John, please speak if I'm not representing. Rachel did feel the biggest issue at Student Council was about the data and the protection, and she felt she explained that was not really part of it.
Just clarify, Rachel wasn't at that Student Council.
No, Rachel was not at April's Student Council, so someone else presented this motion for her. So she was saying at our executive meeting, she was able to present the motion, and she felt her motion was not. Please correct me, guys, if I'm not representing Rachel well enough. She felt her motion wasn't represented or accurate when how it was presented at Student Council. So she felt she had the opportunity and the executive to explain where this motion is coming from. I'm aware this is how NUS does it, so she has done her research, and that's where this is coming from. She explained the situation with the data protection, and executive approved. That is where we are. That is where we are at. So 4 people, out of quorum 5, 4 people said yes. I abstained, and that is where we are at with the motion. Okay.
As it states, it's still in principle, and
It's
for
still
the CBE is even practicable. That's still to be ratified. That is an ongoing process, and that was again discussed yesterday.
So it's still in principle. Nothing has been actioned from this. liberation voting in this way will not be happening because these haven't been actioned. But those are the facts. That is what happened at that meeting. I am welcome. I'm willing to take questions, but I'm not Rachel. I don't know. I can't maybe answer some of these, but I was in the room and I'm welcome. I'm happy to answer any questions. Or John, equally, he's happy to answer.
Oh, well, I just wanted to add to that. My account was, I was at student council in April, and I voted against this motion. I stood up, but I argued against this motion for similar reasons to you, and also for how can we ask people to tell us if they should be eligible or not. And I understand why Rachel thinks we got it wrong. We did not understand it, and rereading the wording of the question is quite right. We're not saying you have to tell us. We're not asking people to tell us. We're saying it was noted at student council. Somebody said adding a note to ask people to simply refrain from voting in an election. So that wouldn't prevent allies from voting if they felt they had a stake. And I was disappointed to hear that this motion had been changed, but after reading Rachel and the discussions that have taken place, with the clarification, I feel that the executive was within their right to make this change. So thank you for more clarification on this issue. But that is, I think, the feeling of more than just myself about this issue, that it wasn't explained properly at student council.
My point is about the representation, and I fall into 318 location groups, and for me it's about the best person to represent me. But one of the issues is what makes a gay man more capable of representing a transgendered woman than a straight man. So, to be honest, it's about the best possible representation, and even just the ability of different people within a certain liberation group to be able to represent.
Yes.
And for you to go, oh, you can't vote because you're straight, or refrain from voting. I'm sorry, but it's the allies, and I'm.
That's where I was with it, Lizzie, and I think that's where when there was certainly the argument of the data. That was a big thing. Maybe in my naivety, that's not a big deal to me. The allies was as well. The issue for me. My big concern also was that Eliza doesn't have a great track record as far as voting. And Dana's smiling because he knows exactly. We don't get a lot of people coming out for voting. So my concern was we maybe get too many people coming out for voting. Well, suddenly we have an LGBT officer, but only people who define themselves as LGBT can actually vote. So how many are you really looking at? So and I think I'm not a policy, I always get Constitution stuff wrong, but so I'm not good with, give me a sermon to write, I'm okay, but give me politics and stuff, I'm not so good. But I think in the attempt to be democratic, I think we are actually excluding people by doing this way. I know NUS does it, but NUS is dealing with thousands of students. Okay, we're dealing with maybe 200 that come out. We have 7,000 something. Kevin will know better than I do. Students, but we know they are not all engaged with the student association. So that was my allies was a huge debate, and I will still stick with that. I appreciate Rebecca's comments saying you understand why it was turned around. I still have the same view of this motion.
It's just on the procedure. I think the whole issue, because it's still not sure about, I think, the role of these officers, and I really think it needs to be decided whether I said this in my speech yesterday, whether their primary job is to represent the minorities, which I think is, or if it's to campaign for these minorities. And I really do think that we need to have a discussion on that, because I think that'll very much decide what's correct in this motion. Because if they're supposed to be representatives of the minorities, then I think it's very obvious that it should be the minorities doing it. As a campaigner, then that's for much more discussion.
I appreciate that. I appreciate that. I could be speaking out of turn. I would imagine the role of the liberation officers is both to campaign, but also to support and encourage and have for the role of all of us as officers is to engage the students and get them to.
I was just like saying like what the primary
But absolutely more
obviously
discussions.
both of them are, but
Absolutely more discussions.
we do need to decide whether they're representatives or campaigning officers. Yeah.
I'm not going to answer your question properly. I'm telling you all that. I won't answer your question. I will try. SJ. And Dane, feel free as a political guy to come in.
I just kind of wanted to throw my opinion in on this because I have a vested interest in this myself, and I was having a long drunken discussion with another LGBT person I know about this last night, and at first it seemed like a wonderful idea. I thought I want, LGBT people to pick someone to represent them, but then when I thought about it, we are taking away somebody's right to vote based on their sexuality, and that is exactly what straight people used to do to us. We are being just as bad as, non-gay people have been.
Would you take away the right of white people to vote for a black officer?
Yes.
No, I wouldn't take anyone's right to vote for anything away.
But yeah, you see the point that I think Rebecca's making is just like if you switch LGBT for women, I mean, is it really correct that all men?
To be honest, I wouldn't mind if
And
men.
no, that's fair enough. I know,
would.
I'm just saying the question, and I really think we need to talk to our students and see what their opinion is more because I'm really coming from a representative of what most LGBT students have thought about.
It was like, who said about...
Okay, guys, it's not a debate. I don't.
Okay, back to the motion itself. Is it correct in saying that this is the only time that a suggested motion from council, the executive has gone the other way in that suggestion?
I think. Historically.
What was the question, sorry?
Okay, one of the things that Luke has said is that this is the only time the executive has gone the opposite way to the suggestion given in student council.
There was other motions at the same student council that, as the student council said no to, but they got changed to yes at the
So all at this meeting.
This is prior to this year, so that's what you're asking.
It's prior to this meeting has it happened.
I think, having been working in my role for 5 years now, this is the first time I have ever seen the House Executive go against the ruling of Student Council, whether or not just quote it or not. There may have been incidences where something has been passed to progress, and by progressing it has become impossible or it hasn't been feasible to continue. But but this is the first time in all the years I've worked here with UHISA, and motions have been made to Student Council that aren't correct, that this has happened, that the voice of Student Council has been, it hasn't been adhered to. They have been put to the executive to further discuss, but this is the first time I have actually seen this.
Okay, can I just say that we're not saying this is a past, really, it's still a wide
I'm
open
trying to
conversation.
choose
I know
my
you're
word
absolutely right.
carefully.
Yeah,
I know it's
and
not.
I find that
but
quite interesting, and that's actually something maybe we should reflect as an executive on as well. I think that's an absolute point to make. But again, they are all still just motions at this point. It's more like keeping.
So I know that what you're trying to make, John,
thing is
the
another
fact
issue.
is, it looks like student council is going yes, no, and then the executive is going no, yes, no, yes.
And I know that happens in other walks of life, so if there is a precedent
Yeah, but
elsewhere
it hasn't
outside this
happened
realm,
here.
it hasn't happened here, you're absolutely right, and if that is an issue, then that's something we have to listen to.
It is the executive's right. It's just
absolutely, and that's why our premise is that it was a constitutional decision, and again, it's not. I'm going to say with Michael's words here, we're not constitutional. So it is all up in the air, and I actually really appreciate what everyone's saying there. And this is the type of thing that I personally want to put off to a referendum rather than just have it as a localised issue, because it does affect everybody, and that's something we really haven't appreciated in the conversations either. I'm sure we had the discussions, and they have taken that avenue as well. I honestly don't want to say. I don't know what to say beyond that point, and I don't know. And it's an interesting point that's been taken out into the vote of no confidence, and that's fair enough. Everyone's got the right to do things like that. But yeah, I'm now rambling. So.
What I was thinking was that it kind of the whole point, I guess, in student council, like voting for these motions and all that, is that we're here to represent the students or institutions, etc. And even though it wasn't quite, it wasn't. It seems a bit of a waste of time to have sat and had. I wasn't there, but looking at this seems a bit of a waste of time to go through all this, have big debates, to vote on it, for it then just to be scrapped and not even looked at. Like that's what it seems like. And I know that if I had, if we had a class rep meeting, like we've got one next week, and the class reps decided that they didn't want something to happen, that it wasn't quite, so we discussed at our executive meeting, and we said no, we're going to do it, they would probably come and find me. So, that's they would do it. Like, you can see that, like, that he would come find me. Because to me, it just seems like a waste of discussion. Why discuss all this, why debate and think about it and vote if it doesn't seem to be listened to? And I would like to think that in the executive meetings that they would look at what the priority of it would be, looking at what the council has decided and going, do we agree with this? And if they say yes, they will agree with it. But if they say no, they would have to put forward a valid reason why they should reject it. And whether or not they looked at it again, it's not feasible, or etc.
I don't think there's anything that's been passed that was rejected. Yeah. This is more of a reversal. It's more like keeping things that that ought to be maybe not looked at, and I can understand that. This is a personal position, by the way. Sorry, just let me finish this one. The actual thing that I think now, in retrospect, what we maybe should have done was take off the table and get represented at this council for a further discussion as another motion, and have a rational discussion about it then. I can see that now.
In several hands, Kevin, I know how it was there a while back. Is your point still relevant?
It's just a summary. I think you've identified two issues. And the first is, yes, constitutionally, the exec can overturn something to student council. But, I think if we were recording it feeling here, we would like that to happen. The other issue that you've identified with this, and I'm reading the debate here, there's two very different views on this. People shouldn't be able to vote for anyone. We'd like it to be liberation of people. And I think one thing that should come from student council today for reflection is that there is different views on this, and not to assume we've got the correct answer.
Eddie, you were next chronologically.
All right. My main issue with this is looking at these minutes, which is nice to finally see, but it looks as though what's happened is they've decided the reason student council voted against it was X, and they've addressed X and kind of moved on. Whereas what's obviously is some people at student council voted against it because of the data issues. Some will have voted against it because of the ally issues. There's a big assumption been made about why it was voted down at student council, and then 4 people have decided they know better, and then they've kind of rolled it out, and I think that's the main issue, because I think there's a very valid argument to be had, and I assume it was had in April student council about the whole, like you were just saying, SJ, do we take away other people's rights to vote to protect the minority? And you then have to ask, well, does that then automatically get extended to the women's officer, that only women, or those who identify themselves as women, can vote for the women's officer? And it's this sort of slippery slope they're heading down. And I think that's not a debate that you can have with 4 or 5 people in a room. That needs to be, a much, and maybe the referendum thing that it is something that maybe just has to go out to the wider student body, because it's an important thing. And I think being decided by a small group in a room is, especially when it's against, a larger group of students who've already voted a certain way against it, to then, in essence, go the other way, just isn't democratic or right.
Well, that's what happens in other realms across the globe, and they're called democratic. I understand what you're
people
saying.
shoot people because they're black. We shouldn't start doing that because it happens elsewhere.
No, I'm just saying it. I'm not saying this is why we're doing it. I'm just saying that it does, and it's just that I'm just trying to counter the argument. I've gone off what I was going to say actually. Again, I just want to confirm it's not being rolled out yet. It's not.
Neil, are you still with us? I apologise because I can't actually see you unless I turn around. If you want to jump in at any point, I'm sorry if I didn't bring you into the discussion. If you have anything to do, please jump in and just sort of talk over us until somebody notices. I don't want to exclude you by accident. Is there anything you want to come in on any of this?
Yeah, it's kind of a slightly more general point than just this debate alone. But it seems to be the issue was that the person that brought forward the motion didn't feel that it was represented properly at the student council, and then felt they represented it better at the executive meeting. So, given that we have student councils every 6 months, and I mean, obviously, people have issues they want to get done quickly, but if your issue isn't going to be represented properly, should you wait 6 months? Should you not wait 6 months and then represent it properly yourself, and then be there?
Thank you. That's Grimes.
I have a question about it. I mean, the fundamental essence of this motion is that certain people who are X can vote for X. How many of the 4 people who pushed this through in the first place identified as any of these groups?
If 3 through 5.
Trying to do themselves, I identify myself as an ally, and some would actually identify myself as a she. We're just sticking with it. Personally, I voted to keep this open because I felt it was actually the right sort of thing that was involved with the impacts of the officer. In fact, it's the impact of the officer. They are the ones that are directly involved, and I understand that you are discriminating, but the ones that do this went through, that I would be able to vote because I would be what I call an ally. So I understand both sides of it. It's not an easy topic, so yeah. That was my position. I know there's one here people making that decision.
Going by the names on the list, there are at least 3 women who identified in the women's room. I don't believe there's the disabled students officer, therefore the disabled students there. I don't think there was anyone from the LGBT group.
The liberation was done on the first day, so our disability officer, who is disabled, wasn't there at the time.
Wonderful.
But Heidi is an international student.
Yes.
So the majority of those people were actually
have some connection. Maybe not as well, but considering there was only 5 than us, surprisingly.
Sorry, it just seemed a bit of not practicing what you preach there to me. If you're saying you have to identify to vote on this, but to vote on the vote,
yes, I've seen that. I've seen that. Absolutely.
I think it's quite clear that there has been a lot of problems with this specifically and with the entire outcome of this executive meeting in general because of the overturning of decisions and because this is the first time any of us have seen the recommendations that came out of this meeting. Is there going to be a change in the way that that executive meetings are publicised?
Well, the intention would have been the minutes would have been represented effectively a week after the discussion, and then it would be made public. And you wouldn't be here right now with this discussion. You probably would be enough people to come across and say, look, we're not happy with this, and that's going to become the discussion. That's why minutes get published. We haven't yet been able to do that, and that's categorically apologise for that. And right now, the situation is they're now out in the public domain. This is how it actually is, and how whatever has been represented up to now. I don't know what discussions folk are having. I'm pretty sure it's not reflective of what the discussion we had during that day. We have to work on that. You're absolutely correct. And that's what we want to do, to put the minutes out as quickly as possible. From this council, same thing will happen in the minutes will go out as quickly as possible. So whoever receives the discussion we have. I personally fully regret not being able to get this out to you guys, because that's what we're here for. We make sure we're very uncomfortable.
taken other executive meetings since this one as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Minutes.
Yeah. Yeah, but can I just say that not anything has happened as a consequence of these executive meetings either. We haven't. It's not as if we've actually said things and made decisions and gone ahead and actioned. As far as I'm aware, would that be correct? That's maybe not the right thing to call it. And if it has happened, then please hold us to. Okay, because we are here.
It's hard to keep it down when there's.
Yeah, the minutes will be getting done, and this is.
Well, it's just a vacuum.
We're trying to break the back of a camel here, and we're getting there, I think.
Just one quick thing I'd like to add to as well. There's this website that we use, our student association. I think it's called, it's pronounced heterosexual, and it's like a guy in America, I think, who does tours about sexualities and all that thing. But he has like a whole page of different definitions of different types of sexualities, or different things that people might find themselves as. And one of the sections is, I can't remember what they called it, but it's a straight person who supports, who actively supports any other sexuality. And that was one of the letters, and that isn't just something he's made up. It's, I can't remember where he's got the information from, but it's a recognised group. It's recognised in different sexualities as a group of people who support actively different combinations. So that's one of the points, I think, is that there are the people out there who consider people who are allies as part of the community. And it's like same with like pride and stuff like that. You know, if you say people who only self-identify as X, Y, or Z can participate in prides, then I've been to a pride because I support it. So does that mean I can't go along and support it because I don't identify X, Y, Z?
I don't know. Do we have a couple? I think you want to come in? Yeah. We've got Kieran as well afterwards, and then I think we're going to wind down for lunch. You got obviously continue talking amongst each other during lunch now, but I think we're going to try and wrap this up and try and get on the schedule. But
I've always said the motion is going to change because the fact that it's self-defined means if you're an ally, you just put down you prefer not to say it. If I represent LGBT, I just put myself down as LGBT.
I believe
I don't really see how you could.
I believe the implementation.
And again, yeah, it's a good point. I think that's part of the that's like a distinction. How do you make sure that whoever is doing this is actually saying what down here? That's absolutely rational as well.
I don't really see the point of the motion if you can't enforce
well,
it.
And that's and that's why it's been left to get further description on how it would be implemented and if it's feasible. But even so, personally, I think maybe we'll wind up and see if it is actually a justifiable thing to do or moral thing to do.
That's actually what I say. When you were saying that, as soon as you said that, I realised that I'm starting to see that there might be slightly different views on the positions here that I initially had. So how, I just want to, obviously this probably have to be answered in lunch with individual people, but how do you feel about the same thing where we do no data store LGBT and we have ally in that list, and that way we make sure that people who really do not have an interest are not going to have that whole shop on the feed?
You're on the spot when having the information is not listed. When asking the question first.
No, because you're asking the question and then that will decide whether or not during the election, when you're doing your votes, what you're going to get, and if you define as LGBTQ+ or an ally, then that will be the drop down. You click that and then that would come up. So yeah, that will disappear. That way people who don't want their sexuality stored will disappear, and they've got into vote LGBTQ+. And that will make sure people who do not have an interest are not just saying, oh, okay, I'll just click on that, and that way it's more representative.
You'd probably have to do that for the disabilities officer,
definitely.
Officer, the women's officer.
It's
or
not
you could just let every student vote for every position. Yeah,
but I'm pointing out it's not exactly hard to set up, and I mean it's very easily done, and that way you're making sure that there aren't an situation, and it is a common situation where people are just like, oh, I know him, we'll just vote for him, even though they're not actually interested, and they're not going to be represented or affected in any way, even as an ally.
Well, that is
see that for
another
any position.
Do enough people know the word ally?
Yeah, I was just thinking about that.
Just as a final comment, can I please say, in regards to allies, there is an international discussion going on right now about erasure of one of the letters in the LGBTQ+ acronym, and that is the letter A. Internationally, allies are co-opting the letter A to stand for allies and erasing as asexual people from the LGBT logo. Okay? There is a huge problem with an entire section of LGBTQ being erased because allies feel they have the right to be represented in the acronym. An acronym that they are allies to, that they are not a part of. They are supporting LGBTQ people in their rights, but they are not a part of that group. No, there's no 2 A's beside it. Allies are not part of the group. They are
Then that would
allies
actually
to the
bring up
group.
to 9 of the argument, which is why we just say
I think they shouldn't erase all this. It should be someone who they should be part of it, but they're not like an active member. If that makes sense.
Keep in mind that we're not going to change that.
No, but I understand what you mean.
It's not like what the Q represents. I should question not
I
clear.
thought it was
Yes.
question, and then I had to
It's
say
queer slash insult. But it's an example of allies trying to push in.
But that's different. That's not what I'm talking about.
Anyway,
It's
I think this is completely irrelevant.
What we're going to do, I think, we're going around. We've had some really good discussion about it, about a specific motion. There's a lot of different opinions, points of view that are coming out. A lot of different details and technicalities about each side, or each side saying something they want to. So what I think kind of the best thing to do here is to basically kind of end here and say that this motion obviously needs some further discussion. On a wider scale, and essentially wider consultation, because even the group here isn't really large enough to discuss this comprehensively. So I think what we'll need to do is to hold this, taking sort of action on the motion until that consultation. I think everyone will be happy with just sort of leaving it as a status quo and then working towards some kind of whether to pursue or whether to abandon depending on the wider consultation. I would like to actually mention...
Are we going to revisit the rest of this after?
Do you want to do that, Heidi? We could revisit the ones that there's been...
Yeah, if there's interest.
Yeah.
If you want to have a look...
I want to be careful about using the word overturn because we need to keep in mind that these haven't... They're not been...
In principle, they have.
In principle, they happen. Okay, so in principle, they happen.
Okay.
So right now, Claire's looking at... I wasn't aware there was other ones.
If you could all if you want to have a quick look through it over lunch and pick out ones that you want to discuss and have them at your mind when we come back, that'd be very helpful.
Well, it's more if somebody would just be able to indicate which ones.
Yeah.
Claire's working on that.
Yeah, I'll need to go through because I honestly until this sort of thing blew up, I was even.
I want to mention one last thing as we all head off to eat something. It is interesting because if this comes back to a point, I was going to make this ages ago, but the discussion moved on, and that is we were asking whether this has ever happened before. And I think Melissa doesn't remember it ever happening before. But I think something that did happen, which is kind of similar, nothing was overturned. But I think in the past, motions have been forgotten about, essentially, and neglected. Ones that were passed, depending on what happened, sometimes they didn't happen, and then when you change officers, the new officers weren't there, didn't know about them, and a lot of, I think, it's interesting because I think a lot of things that, the controversy of this is because the executive going back through motions that from an uncored student council, and I think in the past, the issue is that motions from an uncored student council did not get addressed at all. So I think there's something to consider there as an interesting point, and whether they should be looked at like this. So kind of thinking about that for the future. Is it better that they're looked at, even though things like this happen, or should they, in the worst case, in the opposite end of the spectrum, sort of be forgotten about because they took place so long ago and then nobody remembers? So there's something just kind of food for thought, I suppose. Get into future discussions. Now, off to lunch.